I think the best scores find a way to create a very unique sound. They found a way to describe the point of the show through how they're making this music. Hello, hello, hello. It's time to sit down and put in those earbuds so as not to disturb the neighbors, because this is Off Book, a podcast about Broadway movies, TV shows, and so many other nerdy things. I am Marc Stoufer III.
I'm Hailey Briggs.
And I'm Ashley Szurna. Today we're talking musical style and sound of Broadway scores and how to make one that stands out.
I love Broadway.
Broadway's good. Hot take.
Sorry. Okay, hold on. I need to elaborate on that sentence. My brain's kind of stopped working when I said, okay, what do you want to say? I love Broadway. Anyways, yes. So I think reading actual scores, because I'm a music nerd. I am literally going to music. So reading scores is kind of what I have to do. But it's so vastly different. Even if the same person writes a score, it's so vastly different, and I love that.
Right. Side note, I'm currently in a production of Reading the Bass, and our conductor was out for the day. And so he asked me, because I'm both in choir and band, to kind of use our rehearsal accompaniment thing. But that meant that I had to read the whole orchestra score, and ended up having to basically cue people in. And man, do I have a greater respect for conductors, because reading a 8-part orchestra score is so hard, even when you're listening along with the track. I kept getting lost so many times. It was a lot of fun, but I also kind of felt like I was losing my sanity, for real, not pretend. It was an experience. So congrats to composers. And I mean, those composers are often musical directors, so I'm not going too far off topic. Conductors are impressive, is all I'm trying to say here.
One thing that I noticed is all composers have a distinct sound.
Yes.
And that's what I think is so cool. John Williams, his music. Mm-hmm. You can pick out Star Wars, you can pick out Jaws, you can pick out Indiana Jones, Harry Potter, things like that. But if you listen to them closely, they all sound so similar, which I think is super cool. And lin-manuel Miranda too. You can hear the way he composes and how it fits, it all comes together, even if they're separate things, which I think is amazing. And that's what's so cool about scores, not just Broadway scores, but musical scores in general, because Harry Potter and Star Wars are two different universes, but their music was written by the same person. And it kind of creates a nostalgic sound that you can recognize.
There was a meme that went around a while back that was this graph of the different ways you could tell who had written the musical you're listening to. And it's funny and all, but I also think that it's amazing to me how these composers have found that distinct style, especially those who have written so many different shows. Sondheim had such a unique style. This guy wrote 15 musicals, and somehow managed to find a unique sound for all of them that also sounded the same, similar to his other shows. And that's really impressive, that you can be able to create this kind of sound that is your own, that you can keep reinventing, but also keeping within this kind of unique instrumentation and meter and the different ways the music interacts with itself. The fact that can be stretched out through to so many different shows is impressive.
Mm-hmm. One that I can think of is Andrew Lloyd Webber. Obviously, his is probably the most iconic of his scores. Would probably be, if I had to really pick one, would have to be Phantom of the Opera. Everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you
That's
as soon as
you can't play it, sorry.
Copyright.
You get sued.
And I it's so crazy that they can make honestly, comparing Cats and Phantom of the Opera, it's very two drastic scores, and you wouldn't think that the same person wrote them. But then you look at the credits or whatever, and you're like, wow, they actually, and they were only 5 years apart too. It wasn't different decades or whatever. It was 5 years apart.
Well, and then he went on to go write School of Rock, which sounds different than either one of them. Like, this guy
Oh
wrote
yeah,
an opera and then
completely
also School of
different
Rock
genre.
and Cats and what?
You go from a rock opera to like Cats, and then
Yeah,
a full blown rock and roll. Like what?
I mean, say what you will about Angelo Weber, but he definitely knows how to. He's probably the most like flexible. I don't think. I mean, he has characteristics of his music, but I don't think that he has a genre that he always sticks to. I think he finds
Yeah.
the genre and the style in terms of overarching themes that works best for the material, and then kind of infuses his own originality into that, as opposed to some composers that will tell whatever story they feel like telling in their own musical style.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing that like is like with the composers, they like their keys. So when they're like writing like scores or stuff, a lot of times they tend to write in the general same key. Andrew Lloyd Webber is kind of what's the word? Wild card with that, because Phantom of the Opera, Cats, they're not in the same key. Phantom of the Opera, School of Rock, no. But like it, a lot of times like they'll use the same set of like chords in the same order, but they'll be different notes. They'll be different chords, but they'll use the same ones.
The similar progression.
Yeah, like that's a lot. Like that's very common with like rock and roll. Like rock and roll most of the time is written in like 4/4 and uses the same like 4 chords, and it all stems from these core chords. And I think that is what is super cool about composers and what they can do with their own music. Like that's why it tends to sound similar, because they're like, well, I've written this piece, I'm gonna use that as a base and just build something different.
I mean, I think one of my favorite things is whatever second musical a composer writes, because there are so many shows out there right now that or by first time, at least in terms of like big Broadway shows, first time composers, like things like Beetlejuice and Be More Cheryl and stuff, that this is kind of their first outing into the realm of traditional grand show tunes. And so the next musical that Eddie Perfect writes, it's going to be really interesting to hear what his style is and how much of Beetlejuice is, because Beetlejuice has a really iconic sound that is blending so many different kinds of things together. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see when he inevitably writes his next show, how much of that Beetlejuice style was just him and how much of it was something he created for the show, and how is that going to carry over into what he writes next.
Yeah, and I feel like frankly with Beetlejuice, they created like a new genre. Like
I mean, it's
not. It's a hard, like, I feel like it's not like categorized into a genre. You can hear bits of rap, you can hear bits of rock, you can hear bits of like all of these like genres. And I think that's another thing that's super cool with that composers do with their musical soundtrack. They can take it whatever way they want. If they want to write a rock lullaby, go for it.
Yeah.
Like, who would have thought we would have gotten a rock opera? Like,
I mean,
a rock opera, like those are very different genres. And I think that is what can also make or break like soundtrack in general. Because if you try to match if music to whatever is happening and you don't get it right, then it's just gonna sound weird.
Yeah,
I think another thing that matters is instrumentation. Like taking that into account is really hard, especially for Broadway. Comparing like concert band score to a Broadway score, it's kind of like reduced 4 times because you only have so much space in the area. So you really composers have to take into account how many people you can actually like have in the area, like the pit area. Like you can't have like 16 flutes like you can with a concert band.
I mean, you could, but you could have nothing else.
Only
scored with flutes.
Yep. Yeah. You literally just have a musical with flutes. Like that would be it.
I mean, hey.
And
like
it would sound absolutely awful, but
I'm sure.
Yeah. And like even like comparing that with like musical scores, like like John Williams mostly just writes like orchestral like stuff, you know, and giant, like, yes, there are some cases where an entire orchestra, I think I've only been to one musical where there's an entire orchestra under the stage, which was absolutely insane. Like, it was crazy. There was a ton of people, but like movie scores tend to have that more orchestral sound and more strings and stuff, whereas like with Broadway you hear a lot of like guitar and like things like that, where it's not like an entire orchestra unless you have like a specific type of musical, you know, like Phantom of the Opera is a little bit more orchestral, but it's like you can recreate a lot of that with like, you know, devices. Which,
there are a lot of synthesizers in that show.
Yeah. And so I that comparison is also super cool.
And what I've learned more about, especially as I'm in a musical right now, is the instrumentation can change depending on what production you're in. The licensable recordings that they you can buy if you're putting on an amateur production of a show, it's different for Beating the Beast. There's one specific moment in the opening number where the horns in the original Broadway cast recording are very like subdued, and then you get to the recording the radio thing, and it's just like the loudest, most accented horns ever, and it changes the mood of that entire segment so much. And I think it's really interesting. I don't know why they made that change, but it's a very noticeable change when you listen to the back to back. And so I think that even within the instrumentation, it's like how, you know, the minutia, it's the backing of a, you know, a lot of the focus goes on the you know, the singers and the actors. There's so much you can do in terms of the small details of the instrumental backing that most people probably aren't paying enough attention to. And it can really change the entire tone of something that's going on stage.
Yeah, like we were talking about, like the most impactful that I think has ever existed, hence why it's the longest running show on Broadway ever, Phantom of the Opera.
Yes.
That is downright, I think, one of my favorite musical scores. Like out of like musical theater. Right. It's so like, it's musically just like genius.
Yeah.
Like to take two separate like powers of music, rock opera, literally like,
yeah.
And I think for me, especially because I'm a huge rock fan. I loved it like ever since I was a kid. But it just has such a powerful sound, you know, like it's not one you easily forget. And that's what makes it my absolute favorite. And then like on the other spectrum, we have Hamilton, which is like my second favorite. And it's a complete opposite sound. It's rap, a rap musical. And it's like, it's so like crazy to me, the different things that composers can do.
And what's interesting to me about Hamilton is that Alex Lacamoire clearly picked out a very specific sound. You know, he's described how he wanted something that sounded like something that was both modern and also that kind of the era. So you've got the violins, but you also have a drum set, and you've got, you know, the trumpets. You've got an Ableton, which is a very digital sounding thing, and you can hear those digital elements in the show. And you also have that very organic. In my shot, you know, you have somebody pounding on a table to make the percussive beat. And so they've created, I think the best scores are, and we'll touch on this more a little bit later, but I think these shows find a way to create a very unique sound that is kind of they found a way to describe the point of the show through how they're making this music. So it sounds like the whole message of the show. You know, Beetlejuice sounds kind of like something you've heard before, but is a little bit out there because, you know what, Beetlejuice is a little bit out there. Hamilton sounds a little bit of the era and a little bit modern because that's the whole point of the show.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think I probably prefer like the modern shows, but that also included Mamma Mia because. But so I don't know, like you were saying, it has like such a unique sound to like where it's pertained. So obviously this is like Mamma Mia is a very fun, free-flowing show. And if you listen to like any of the scores or the songs, that's all it is. It's like these unique sounds, and all of a sudden you got like guys with fins on their feet dancing around, like
Yeah.
I think Dear Evan Hansen is an interesting show because I think that if you were going to pick a musical that had the most generic musical theater sound ever, it would be Dear Evan Hansen. It kind of
100%.
just sounds like pop music that's kind of musical theatery. It doesn't really have, I mean, it has some of those electronic elements to it, but it's like guitar, piano, and drums, and a bass. It's a pretty by the books orchestration, and it sounds cool. I really love the orchestrations to that show, but its sound is very neutral, which I think works for that show. But I think that I think one of the reasons that they haven't blown up as much as some other shows is because Beetlejuice has like, what even is that sound? Whereas Dear Evan Hansen, its sound was just music. It sounds like pop music, and so I think that that's part of the thing, is that you have to make sure you're coming up with something that doesn't sound like what people are used to. Otherwise, it's just going to kind of be okay. Even if it's really good, it's just going to sound like you've heard it before, even if you haven't.
Yeah,
well,
I mean,
even with Mean Girls too, like you'd expect that kind of like high schooler sound, and not high schooler sound, but like the typical like modern drama. Right. And even that has kind of more of a unique sound than Dear Evan Hansen. I'm not saying it's a bad musical, kind of. The message is very weird, but yeah.
Like I think that is probably the most important like thing for, and I guess, I don't know, it depends, because if you really want like a successful musical, like I feel like you have to write something that hasn't been done before or hasn't been heard before, because we're used to that like that classic musical theater sound, right? The pop music, like that type of thing. But like there aren't many rock and roll musicals, there aren't many rap musicals, and I think having that like type of like uniqueness, I think, can bring a lot to the table, because this is like, oh, this is new, this is unique, it's something I want to listen to,
I completely forgot to mention Hadestown. That has a very unique.
Yes.
It's so good. I mean, it has a very different sound. I mean, the instrumentation is pretty by the books. I mean, you've got piano, you've got a guitar, you've got a drum set, you have a trombone, which trombones don't normally appear, but it's not just the instrumentation; it's how they're playing it. I mean, they're playing in a very different style, so you get this very different musical feeling. And they managed to hit all of the emotional moments in the show without relying on any of the tropes of the normal, traditional musical theater score, because they've managed to blend this very, common genre that for some reason hasn't appeared on Broadway with the more, common notes of what happens in a score, and blended the two. And I think that's really cool, because it's not necessarily a unique sound for the show, but it's a unique sound for musical theater, and the way they used it is just really cool.
Yeah, I think that if you want to write a musical that would have a unique sound, blend genres. But you know what? Like, it's not even like you can like let's take like soul and rock. Wait, no. Like soul
disco music
and disco.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Boom.
Good idea.
Together. You don't know. Like, we didn't think that we'd be able to have a rap musical. We didn't think we'd be able to have a rock musical or a rock opera. Like, just like
Pirates of the Caribbean musical is going to be scored entirely with disco music.
With disco.
I'm kidding. No.
Johnny Depp doing the.
Oh my.
No.
No.
Playing his guitar in the corner.
Johnny
Depp, do you want to be musical?
Oh yeah.
But yeah, blending two different genres can create such a unique sound, and I think that could create something that you didn't know was like possible.
Or at the very least, make use of the genre in a new way. Because I don't think Hailey's Town really blended genres, but it
No.
used it in a way that you don't normally see. So, do
Yeah.
something with it. Don't just use the genre. Make something out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now it's time to pay some bills. Today's episode is sponsored by Jukebox Musicals LLC. Now, to be clear, these aren't jukebox musicals like Tina or Jersey Boys, where it's a show with music already written by an artist or of a certain style. This is a service where you can rent a portable jukebox and hit shuffle play until you find a full track list for your musical.
And yeah, the musical style will be all over the place. You'll go from a heartbreaking ballad to an up-tempo rock number to a 20s instrumental jazz piece. But that jazz piece will be great for the world's third longest dance break, and it will mean that you don't have to go through the process of picking a sound for the show. The sound can just be all.
It's a lot of work to try and find the sound of your show, and someone's always going to find a problem with it. But with Jukebox Musicals LLC, everybody will find something they like, and also something they don't. Wait, this isn't really a good idea, is it? Maybe let's move on.
I mean, I think we touched on some of it earlier. Find something that works for the material. I mentioned that Beetlejuice, the sound of it works so well because it fits the material. If you try to make Beetlejuice with the instrumentation of Hailey's Town, I mean, it could work, but probably wouldn't. So be intentional with what you choose. Don't just throw a dartboard at a reel of musical genres and expect it to work, because it probably won't.
Mm-hmm.
I think one musical that has a very, very unique score would be Rent.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I kind of forgot Rent existed for a hot second because we don't talk about Rent live, but exactly. Just having that little mix of it, kind of it's almost not musical, as in it seems more reality than anything, because obviously the story is going through what people actually go through.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's you hear the rock music at the beginning, and then there's the ballad, and then there's salsa music, and it's where is this going?
Yeah.
But I think definitely, I can't think of the composer right now. Sue me later. Yes, there we go. See, we were just talking about that before we started recording too, and I can't believe I forgot.
Yeah,
And it's just I think with Jonathan Larson's, all of his musicals are like that, where it's it's subtle changes, but at the same time it's so unique that it stands out.
Yeah.
And speaking of Tick Tick Boom, that is a very, very unique musical. It's because I feel a biography musical is one of the most unique things. You have frankly, I don't know of a ton of musicals based off people, except for Tick Tick Boom and Hamilton, and I think having that is also very interesting, and I know that's not score, I'm not talking about music, I'm just talking in general, and the way you can take someone's life and to create it into music.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very that takes a strong composer, I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda was literally just reading a biography and was oh my god, I'm gonna write a song about this. And he managed to write an entire 3-hour musical about a man that no one really paid attention to until now. Well, obviously they did. If you took history, AP got whatever, you knew about Alexander Hamilton. I'm just talking in general. Okay. I'm talking in general. Alexander Hamilton, friend of the show.
I mean, he's been dead for a long time, but that's fine.
He is friend of the show in spirit.
No, come on and join the show, Alex.
And I think that's another part that creates such a unique score, is when it's written about another person. You can write characters and stuff, but it's not the biography of someone.
Right.
And not only can things like that make a score unique, but also like I said, was talking about earlier, keys. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of keys that are super easy to write in. It depends. For orchestral concert type bands, B flat, E flat, they're all super easy to play in. But when you get into guitar and bass and stuff like that. Like E flat is a nightmare,
Right.
a literal nightmare. And so I think these, like, having it in a certain key, even if it, like, major, minor, it can depict how that story, it can depict a tone. You know, if you're writing something in major, it's going to be more upbeat, happy. But if you're writing something in minor, it's going to be, you know, a lot more depressing. And I think that can also make or break a score and make it unique.
Sure. And I think you touched on an important idea that however you plan to tell your story musically, whatever vocabulary you want to use, I think it's important that you make sure that it can like fulfill all the emotional needs of your show. You want to make sure that you can, because I mean, most genres can handle most things, but you want to make sure you know how to use it. You want to make sure that you understand how to harness that kind of hidden, you know, you can unlock so much if you really study the style you're going for. And so you want to make sure that before you commit to something, before you write a song in that style, you really want to make sure that you know how to use it. I think that's one of the pitfalls of the Dear Evan Hansen soundtrack, is that they never really figured out how to use that style to the best of its ability. I think it's all okay, but I think there was so much more they could have done in the style to really create those kind of musical images in people's heads that help to bolster that emotion. And I think that just comes from having a better understanding of the material to make sure that you know how to utilize it better.
Even talk about time signatures.
Oh, true.
Like, I mean, I don't remember the composer or the song, but there's a song written in like, what was it, like 1,000 something over one?
Oh yeah, it was like Beethoven, I think.
Maybe.
We really didn't want bar lines.
But it was
all
like
one measure.
Long, and it was one measure.
Yeah, it's like a half hour just in one measure. Because
yeah,
the guy didn't like bar lines.
Time signatures also
yes.
can make or break something. Can you imagine playing the same measure for 20 minutes?
If you get lost, you would have done that.
There's no bar.
Let's start from 67,000 notes into the first measure. That's our rehearsal letter A.
Rehearsal letter A. We go through the alphabet. We go through the Greek alphabet.
Yes.
We go through Roman numerals, and we go through phonetic. Note alpha.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, I think it really just, you need to make sure that you have a good understanding of music theory, which I'm sure these composers do. But like, if you don't know the difference in feeling between 6/8 and 7/8, it feels different. You can feel the difference. And, you know, the difference between writing an 8 and writing in a bass 4, you know, just making sure that obviously these people understand it, but making these intentional choices with the difference between, I mean, if you want to write something in 4/4 versus, I mean, 8/8 isn't really a commonly used time signature, but, you know, you could, but it's going to be different. It's going to feel different in the way it sounds. And so it's important, you know, when you're considering something between, 3/4, 6/8 are kind of the same thing, but also they're going to feel different. So it's important to make sure that you utilize those properly. You know, use music theory is cool if you know how to use it and use it right. So do that.
Yeah, and like playing 16th notes in 4/4 is very different than playing it in like 6/8. You know, like it, and like tempo too. Like like they all have. There's so many things that can make up a composition. You know, like we have all of these things, and I think the biggest, like the most important thing is making them all work together. Like we talked about earlier, is they all have to work together. You can't have like a super fast tempo in like, I mean, you can, but your musicians will hate you if you have a super fast tempo with a bun in the craziest key possible. You know, like with all
the flats,
like sharps, flat, like a ton of like ugly stuff. Like your musicians will hate you.
Yeah. Like,
you know, if you're going 250 in like the key of B, like that's not going to be fun for anyone. Even the director, you know, like it's like having all of these different like parts just mixing together to create beauty.
Also, don't write your musical in cut time. Just write it in common time and speed it up.
Please.
Cut time is so unnecessarily annoying. I get why it exists on paper, but it's not fun to perform. It's not fun to play.
I hate cut.
Please don't do it.
Don't be done. Like, can you imagine John Philip Sousa the musical?
Oh, I'm sure someone's developing it.
The
Physical.
Haley is
Not
leaving
that
the
one.
chat. Haley is done.
the Sousical.
Physical, the other
John
one.
Technically, that's technically a thing. That's
That's
just pronounced different.
Yeah.
yeah. John Philip Sousical.
Yes, that's the name. All right, so we're making 2 musicals now. One based on Pirates of the Caribbean, one based on the works of John Philip Sousa. None of his works have lyrics, so I'm not sure how that's gonna work, but we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Like, don't put that into production. We don't need a musical in cut time. Thank you.
Twice as fast and common time. It's fine. It can count.
Like, no, that's not how it works.
Unless it's the works of Stephen Sondheim. Cut time is too good. There's probably some cut time in Sondheim. That's allowed. No one else is allowed to do that.
Someone play some exit music because this is the end.
Next time, we'll be diving into podcasts and what makes them work.
In the meantime, go listen to a podcast. Maybe more of this one. Anyway, bye.